Today I have Preston Smith with me, and I met Preston during my a travel that I made in California. I think it was 2017, and I visited you in Humboldt in California, and I got to see you work with the plant world at that time, and you introduced me to new things like John that I never heard about, and you even, when you were making your own at that time, you also showed me some of the coastal redwoods. I have great memories with you. I think it was definitely with time, one of the highlight of that journey that was sometimes a little bit complicated for me. And I remember our interesting conversation, just like the one we were starting to have before this recording, right? And you also got me to attend the conference on permaculture at the time. Then I know that you expanded with natural farming, right? And you've been continuously moving, on your journey with your research and your remembering journey as well. And time has proven that we were in a real dialogue, which is really, really great. And I'm really happy to share the space with you today, because I think you're a powerful alchemist, and we're gonna hear more about that with you today. So I'm glad we are posing to create this moment together. And first, I want to leave the room for you to introduce yourself and maybe share with us what kind of childhood you had, and maybe we can start there and then build our way up to where you are now and what you've been working and what you are working on creating.
Great. Yeah, well, I'm really excited to be talking with you today, Aria, and also a lot of mutual respect. You're a great writer, researcher, and have a lot of respect for your work, so thank you. Yeah, so a little bit about myself, my story, originally from Southern California, and I guess I'll start with just always having an appreciation for nature, kind of looking for those wild places, whether I was living in the city or, going camping on the weekends with my family, riding my bike around, looking for those hidden places. Always felt like really drawn to kind of those wild, forgotten, sometimes overlooked places, maybe like an empty lot or something, like what's going on here? And so as I grew up, we moved to Salt Lake City, Utah, from Southern California, where my folks are from. And I spent a lot of time hiking through the Wasatch, the Uintas, the mountain ranges, spending time in the desert, San Rafael, Goblin Valley, Arches, all these beautiful places in the desert. And it was a very tough transition to move there, but I found sanctuary in nature and just really had an appreciation, would go camping with my friends and doing a lot of outdoor activities, and snowboarding in the wintertime, skiing originally, then I got into snowboarding, and going biking through the desert with my dad, and we would go explore all these like old Native American Indian dwellings, and just kind of like loved adventure, the sense of adventure in nature and the wild and exploring. And so I guess I just always had that appreciation for nature. And then after high school, my previous occupation, I was an architectural draftsman, and that was kind of the direction I was heading until that kind of hit a dead end in 2008, 2009. There was a collapse in the economy. And so I found myself going, well, what's next? I did what I was supposed to do, did some college and got the desk job and owned a house and all these things. And then it all went up in flames. It all kind of evaporated. And it was like, well, what do I do now? There was no work to be found in construction at that time. And so I just kind of found myself at odds of like, and looking back, those moments when they seem like a tragedy or like this chaos in the moment, looking back, it's really it's a course correction. I think it's a blessing in disguise, and that might take some time to see, but I definitely see that that's the case, like in retrospect, looking back. So what happened after I lost that job is I was literally going up into the foothills. I bought a sleeping bag and a tent with my last paycheck, and I was spending time in the foothills, just kind of enjoying nature. But at this point, it was a little more real. Like, this is now, like, society is collapsing down in the valley, and up in the foothills, getting to know the plants. I learned about nettles. I learned about elderberry, were like some of my first two that I learned to identify, and learned, like, okay, these are like now herbs I can survive and sustain on. And so really, like, getting to know the plants was more for survival than anything else. And so I kind of, like, instinctually have always been a naturalist. And then I did end up moving to Japan. I had an opportunity to go to Japan, which was very interesting because the first day I got to Japan happened to be March 4th, 2011. If that date rings the bell for anybody, that's the day that the Dainichi nuclear power plant meltdown happened. There was an earthquake and a subsequent tsunami that swept across northern Japan, wiping out Miyagi Prefecture. And I was literally in the air landing, about to land, 15 minutes away from Tokyo, when the captain got on the intercom and was basically like, there's just been a natural disaster, and we're going to have to do some circling around the airport till we get permission to land. We never got that, so we flew south to Nagoya. Had we been flying north, we would have actually seen the tsunami coming across the land, because it was a half an hour subsequent to the earthquake. So we fly south to Nagoya and land in this whole chaotic experience. So anyways, the reason why I want to mention this is because it was like there was upheaval and a collapse of, like, the civilized economy I was used to in the States, and then I go to this other country and I go right into this other, like, upheaval. And so I think it really catalyzed something within me about, like, the societies that we're living in, and how vulnerable we are to these supply chains, to the energy grid, to things like this. And I had a great time. I was living in Tokyo. It was a very populated city, as everybody well knows if you've been there. And I'm a very adaptable person, but that was a little excess for me. Too much overstimulation and just excess of everything. Too many people. So anyways, I was learning Japanese and was there on a student visa, and I knew that it was time to head back to the States, but I also knew that I couldn't go back to a desk job. It was very unhealthy for me. I weighed about, I don't know, 40 pounds more than I do now, and I was not healthy. I did not feel healthy. And so I knew I couldn't go back to a desk job. I still do work on the computer, but I just don't do it all day long. I love getting outside and working with my hands. And so I had this opportunity to go to Humboldt County. I had a sister who had been living there for about 20 years, and well, a total of 20 years she lived there, but I had visited her in high school and always knew it was a very beautiful place. Knew, like, at some point in time I might live there. And that opportunity came to go work on a cannabis farm, and I took that opportunity. And so what Humboldt really did for me was it allowed me to, like, live off grid, live in these different situations, and be closer to the land, and learn about foraging for plants and mushrooms, and using the resources that are around me, and really kind of just and learning about, like, how to live more efficiently and sustainably, regeneratively, kind of knowing where all your waste, you're channeling your waste streams to, where you're closer to know, like, where your food is coming from, shopping at farmers markets, but also, like, growing a lot of my own food. So getting into not only cannabis, I always say is, some people say it's the gateway drug. I don't believe that, but for me, it was the gateway herb into growing other vegetables. So learning to grow cannabis taught me to grow other vegetables and other herbs, perennial herbs. And so this kind of got me looking into more permaculture, and I just started like really loving permaculture and, you know, living off grid, living off the land, and going to a lot of these different events, which we got to go to one in Hopville, California. Um, and so these different events, these permaculture convergences are really great. Um, they're great events that bring a lot of like-minded people together about collaborating and just how to kind of like permaculture is a design protocol that can be applied to anything. It's not just agriculture. It can be applied to a business. It can be applied to your family and how you function as a family. It can be applied to anything. So from there with permaculture, I kind of led into Korean natural farming and herbalism too, because I was taking a class in herbalism at Dandelion Herbal Center in Humboldt. So that's how I kind of transitioned from a naturalist into being more of an herbalist. Was like a friend of mine's like, well, you're already a wild crafter, like you should go like take this course, which I did. Great herbalist Jane Bothwell, who is now retired, but her school still goes on, Dandelion Herbal Center in Humboldt, California. And so that all kind of led me into Korean natural farming too. I found through permaculture and really grew fond of that because now we are learning to culture the indigenous microorganisms in our immediate environment. And what KNF really taught me was to kind of recondition the way I think and look at the resources around me. So seeing the intrinsic value of those resources that are directly around me in my environment. And, you know, an example of that, if you live on the coast, you already have a major advantage, you know, if you're a farmer, if you're a gardener, because there are so many resources you can get from the ocean, seaweed, fish, you can get, you know, you can extract calcium from shells, you can extract chitin from crab shells. Seaweed is amazing and kelp is amazing. So, you know, an example would be, you know, going to the beach on a Saturday when there's a bunch of seaweed washing up and literally going out and grabbing, you know, garbage bags of seaweed when you see all these people just having like a picnic on the beach and they're kind of looking at you like you're crazy. Like, what is this guy doing? But I'm looking at them crazy, like, well, if you don't see the value of these resources around us, and you know, maybe they're not all farmers or gardeners, but this is just one example. I was talking to a friend the other day, and you know, we were talking about how like there's even things like, you know, we were using the example of like dandelion greens, right? So somebody might see the more of a value in like dandelion greens that are sold in the market because they're there in a market, they have a nice label on them, rather than going outside and picking a very common, you know, herb that's already around, just because there's some kind of conditioning that's happened to us to be very disconnected from our natural environment, our natural surroundings. And so there's a deconditioning process that needs to happen. And I did work a year in retail grow at a place in Humboldt County. And I kind of just started reverse engineering all these products and realizing like I can source all of these things myself. I can make all of these things. So it was kind of a conflict of interest. Needless to say, that job didn't last for long, but but then I became teaching. I started teaching Korean natural farming. I had the great opportunity of training in Hawaii directly with Master Han Kyu Cho, and learning through him and his son, Young San Cho, who is kind of the new generation of Korean natural farming, which is Jadam. It's a much more simplified version of Korean natural farming. And so these are practices that I've integrated and, you know, taught workshops on for the past now about, I've been growing cannabis and other herbs as an occupation, veggies as an occupation for the last 10 years, but about the last 6 now. I've been incorporating Korean natural farming in Jadam, and I love it. I won't ever go back to conventional farming again. So this is what I do for a living, for an occupation. And then I basically now, I also have, so I have Rogue Natural Farming is one of my companies that focuses on consulting and education and applying permaculture, these regenerative modalities of gardening and farming. So that's kind of one thing, one company I have, and the other is Living Abundance, which is more the wild crafting, herbal tinctures. My herbal studies have taken me more now into alchemy, spagyrics, and so this is some of the equipment you see behind me. Basically, that's kind of where it's come to now. And so living-abundance.com is my website for my herbal apothecary. I also am a beekeeper, and I have some bee products as well that I'm making, and I'm working with mushrooms as well too. So in a nutshell, that's kind of my story and how I ended up here.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because you're doing a lot of, you're always experimenting. I think when we have the minds that we have sometimes a hard time keeping up with all the ideas that we have, because every day we have new ideas, and you have to build on all of that. So I was wondering also, when you launched Rogue Natural Farming, Rogue, like, I'm not sure I know exactly the definition, but I think I know the spirit of rogue, right? It's a little bit of a rebellious spirit. Maybe you can introduce how you got to form the identity of that. Maybe you can kind of dive deeper into the process of how it formed in your mind, and then maybe it took a little bit of time for you to manifest it in your reality.
Sure, yeah. It's kind of a back burner project, and it's working more of a full-time project on the side. Rogue Natural Farming started for me in Oregon. So I've been in Humboldt County since 2011, but the past 3 years, I just moved back to take on a job and manage a farm using Korean natural farming methods in southern Humboldt. But the prior 3 years, I actually went up to southern Oregon, the Rogue Valley, and so that refers to the Rogue Indians, who were completely decimated actually by the European settlers who came into that valley. That tribe, there's no blood lineage of that tribe left today, unfortunately. It's a really sad story, but they were known for being extremely fierce and defending their land because they were getting pushed out. And so the name doesn't originate with them. I think that was a name given to them by European settlers, but the name Rogue, yeah, for me it's wild. It's kind of going against the conventional way. And so for me, that's exactly what is represented by things like permaculture, by Korean natural farming. Many of these people who we've been blessed to learn these protocols, like Bill Mollison, David Holmgren, the founders of permaculture, Master Han Q Cho, these people did not bring this information forward without great adversities. Some of them like being targets, like literally targets of the state. I could get into stories, but literally like almost dying for teaching, like being targeted and almost, being just stomped out completely because of their methods. So for me, I think that anytime you go against that conventional way, you're looking at really taking on a lot of adversity and a lot of you're just looking at, like, it's not going to be easier road, I'll put it that way. And so that's kind of what Rogue represents to me, and that's where I had the impetus to start Rogue Natural Farming. when I was living in the Rogue Valley and I started teaching workshops. And so I was also very inspired by Native Americans. Much of my herbalism practices and the knowledge that I've attained is looking towards what I've learned from Native Americans and their uses of these indigenous plants and medicines.
Yeah, I get the spirit of the rook, and yeah, it's also very potent as a choice of vocabulary, right? There is, and I think in your work there is a real identity, right? And a real signature also in the products, you know, of Living Abundance now that you will soon also, I mean, a lot of them are already created, but soon they will be like, we will have a window to see what exists and what you've been maybe creating all these years. I've seen you, you know, you showed me also many things that were really unfamiliar for me. And I think it also did spark, you know, some of my alchemist also spirit, though it's much more contained than yours. But I think it took a few months for me to try some things. And you also give me a June Scoby at the time, but maybe you can share a little bit about the products you've been created. Maybe, you know, how did it get started with what did you, you know, what did you start with in the beginning to you know, to create alchemy, and then maybe take us through the journey to where you are now and what you are working on now. And I know you also, you know, you are keeping bees, and maybe you can touch a word on that also, because I imagine it's a special relationship as well.
Sure, yeah. Okay. So yeah, so you know, permaculture, I think, is where I got into beekeeping, and you know, really quickly fell in love with bees and having them around. I've had them on different properties that I've had for the last 5 years, and every year my apiary grows by a few hives. I produce enough honey to I don't sell honey at markets or anything like that. The honey that I do extract from my hives and the products that I get from the hive, the byproducts like propolis, bee pollen, things like that, I make products from. I love to ferment. I have a history of fermenting and used to make beer with my brother. He kind of taught me how to brew beer, and then I got into fermenting honey and really kind of got tapped more into my bloodline, which is more Scandinavian, Swedish, Norwegian. And that kind of gave me, kind of tapped me back into it. Really, mead making really kind of like took me into the traditions of the Vikings and kind of more that Scandinavian heritage. And while the Vikings were definitely some fierce warriors, they're actually farmers and very civilized people, though, in a lot of ways, artisans. And so, you know, mead has kind of been this way to tap back into my lineage. And some of the products that I'm making now from the hive go well beyond mead. And I can talk about what those are. You mentioned Jun, and I did give you a Jun Scoby back in the day. So for anybody familiar or not familiar with Jun, it's similar to kombucha. It is a different Scoby, which stands for symbiotic culture of yeast and bacteria, or bacteria and yeast, right? So depending upon where you're culturing, you're going to have a different kind of a culture of different yeast and bacteria. Well, the Jun is said to come from the Himalayas, brewed by Buddhist monks, is where the original culture is said to have come from. And so what it is honey instead of sugar with, you know, kombucha, and then green tea instead of black tea. And so Jun, the first time I ever tried Jun, I was just like, it was something completely different than kombucha for me. It raised my vibration like instantly. And I was like, whoa, what is this? There's something about it. And so I really have kept a junk culture for, I don't know, about 10 years now, and I'm doing it more. I keg it for different events. But one of the new products I'd like to talk about, that I guess this will be the official launch and discussion of this product I call Benevolence, which will be available on living-abundance.com. But this is what I like to call a hive elixir, or yeah, it's essentially a hive elixir, or a hive cider. Hive cider was another word I was coming up with. And so what it is essentially a vinegar made from honey, but it's infused with other byproducts from the beehive too, like bee pollen and propolis. And so these are all really like highly nutritive, and we're talking about enzymes and probiotics and many minerals and vitamins and phytonutrients. As we were discussing earlier, bee pollen alone in Germany is considered medicinal grade because of the just how concentrated with nutrition it is. So this product is fermented, which also makes all of these minerals and nutrients more bioavailable, the process of fermentation, which is also what KNF, Korean Natural Farming, is all based on. It's about fermentation and extraction to where you have a very bioavailable source now that can be uptaken by plants. That system can be applied. I do use it with my bees. I make products, fermented plant juices, fruit juices that I feed my bees, the same methodology. So that's one of the products with the bees. I through my herbalism classes with Dandelion Herbal Center, that's where I really learned to do tincturing. And then I took another course with Sage Apotham, who's an amazing herbalist from the Pacific Northwest. And his school is evolutionary herbalism. So I took that course, and it was really just a whole nother level of, basically that's what got me into spagyrics. And so spagyrics is an alchemical way of processing plants. And so that's kind of who I really first learned about spagyrics through, and went through that whole course, and kind of have been stepping up my protocols for the medicines and elixirs that I make now. Everything is moving towards the spagyric process because they're just a more highly refined medicine. They're much more potent on a homeopathic dose. So it's just a much more effective and a deeper healing that can come from these elixirs. So they don't work on the same level of like kind of more these surface levels that say a normal tincture might buy. Not to say like these tinctures in the store that are not, spagyrically processed aren't potent. They can have some efficacy for sure, but spagyrics really works on a much more subtle energetic level and a deeper healing level. And so that's kind of why I've chosen to go this path. And these are some of the spagyric line that I'm creating now. They're all have planetary correspondences as well. So every herb has a planetary correspondence. And so you basically, when processing these herbs, you work under different influences. So I like to use the example of like Mercury retrograde, which we're just coming out of a Mercury retrograde right now. And I don't know about you, Arya, but it's been a pretty intense one for me and a lot of people I've talked to lately. But I mean, this is kind of an example of like, we know the moon causes tides and it has an effect on the psyche. And that can actually be measured in crime and different things that happen, on our planet with the human condition. So I think Mercury retrograde is another good example to show us how during Mercury retrograde, things can kind of seem to go haywire. Like, cars break down. Like I can't tell you how many people I know, like my friend just got in a car accident. My car's having, issues. All these other people are having, lots of things seem to be breaking down, and every planet has a sound that is being broadcast towards us. And these frequencies have their own signature. And so if we're working under these signatures, this is where we get into archetypal, basically signatures, and how to work with these planetary influences and really focus them into medicines and elixirs that we can create to really just heighten those aspects, and that aspect within ourselves that we're healing.
And you were also mentioning, right, the signature of copper or glass you sometimes work with, right? And this also, I think it has, I mean, everything with the intention you are putting, right, and your, the connection you have with through the whole process, I think is gonna have an influence on your final product. And out there, we have a lot of companies who work only on the 3D level. And so even if they extract or work with plant, if they don't understand anything about the higher planes, then their product is only gonna take us so far in healing, and sometimes maybe there might be some counter healing embedded in that, because it's just so 3D, and sometimes you really need to go beyond these 3D planes, don't you think?
Absolutely, yeah, well said. And so yeah, so everything in terms of alchemical cosmology and thinking of the alchemical approach, everything has everything is said to have come from like prima materia, which is this like original. And in science, it could be described as like the bang, that point where boom, like consciousness expanded from. And so everything has a signature of that original essence, that prima materia. And so whether we're talking about from an alchemical standpoint, minerals and rocks are not inanimate, they're also alive. So everything can be refined down. The three principles of alchemy, the sulfur, mercury, and salt, which is the body, the mind, and the spirit, they can be refined down into a more evolved state. And this is really the process of nature. Nature is always evolving. And so nature is the ultimate alchemist, right? Like all of these processes that you use in alchemy, that we use in the laboratory, are happening in nature. So what we're really doing, like in a laboratory alchemy setting, is just creating these processes that happen in nature and speeding up the process of evolution, so to speak. And so, like you said, everything has correspondences, including metal. Like, so for instance, this is copper. This is ruled by Venus. So many people use copper for distillation. Now, there are some people who take it as far, if they're spagirically processing something, that they might only process, like rose, for instance, is a classic Venetian, archetype. And so like rose would be great to process in a copper still. And many people process a lot of plants that are not ruled by Venus, but from a real alchemical standpoint, you could take it to that extreme. Now, glass, I run a glass distillation train too, and that is a little bit more earth elements and more neutral. So you're not really imbuing these signatures as much as, say, like copper, for instance. So yeah, it's just interesting to see, like, if you start learning about the archetypal energetics and these examples that exist in nature, and start seeing these correspondences, whether you're looking at it from chakras to planets to people or plants, it really gives you this framework and this signature that you can. Let's say I went to the Amazon. I've never been there before. I would love to go someday. And there's all of these different plants, like thousands of different species of plants that I've never seen in my life. Well, because I've spent time while crafting and understanding some of these archetypal ways of seeing, I could actually then go somewhere where and witness plants or creatures or anything in nature, you can start to see these archetypal examples in life, and it can give you great insights to that medicine and maybe how that could be used for healing and medicinal purposes for even entheogenic purposes. I don't think it was coincidence that ayahuasca, the two plants that were used, the catalyst for ayahuasca, I don't think it was coincidence that somebody found that catalyst to mix with ayahuasca and make that a bioactive ingredient. Somebody instinctually knew that these plants should be combined together. I mean, we're talking about an area of tens of thousands of species, and I don't think somebody was sitting there going, let's try to mix this one with that one and this one with that one. I mean, there's a deeper layer, and you talked about kind of the 3D. That would be a very 3D approach of like, okay, like let's mix these together and see like what happens, and then we'll mix these together. There's a deeper level of understanding when you tap into and I think alchemy is a great way of tapping into some of these different dimensions that we can get into with creating medicines and healing elixirs.
Mm-hmm. And you were briefly mentioning your health in the beginning, right? So what all this research has done for your health, and I know also, you've been like myself working on your abilities since the last time we spent time together in the same geographic area. I can feel it in your field. So I know it's also part of the journey, right? So it's also, our health also allows us to dive deeper into who we are and who we are choosing to be here as well. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit about that?
Absolutely, yeah. That's a really cool topic. So another thing about spagyrics and laboratory alchemy is whether you're working with metals, minerals, plants, working with these archetypes, they all have different lessons and different aspects of who we are and the self-growth that we're going through. And we're always learning, and we're always evolving. We're always, shedding layers and refining and distilling down our essence. And I mean, behind me, the Phoenix rising is the classic example of like rising from the ashes, after that process of calcination, burning down what no longer serves you and rising out of that a more refined essence. And so that's another level that these spagyrics work on. I've heard it described before, like somebody once put it, that spagyrics are kind of like taking it's like internal acupuncture. They're working on the meridians of the body, these subtle energetic fields of the body, and different herbs through their different archetypes are working on these different aspects within our body. But also, like, as within, so without, and as above, so below. So again, going back to that prima materia, where everything is a fractal of existence, that prima materia. And so everything has that, you could call it the God essence, or whatever word you want to use for that the creator, the spirit essence within it. We're all fractals of that. So you still see remnants of alchemy that exists, like even in our language. But as I was getting into, as within, so without. So when we're extracting these aspects in a plant, when we're making these medicines, it's also working on us. So there's an internal process that's happening when we're going through these processes of distillation, calcination, dissolution. We're taking the plant through that process, but it's also working on us through that process. So there's an internal process that's happening too. If I was to put water in here into my alembic still here, you would put water in the bottom, and then you would steam distill your herb. You would put in this center chamber, the bio chamber here, right? And so you would steam inject this chamber, and you would take the essence of that down, and then you would condense that down and collect it. And so that circular motion is also the microcosmic orbit again, and that's a meditation where you're literally doing that internally. So these processes can be seen as being, you know, metaphoric or very literal, but no doubt we live in a landscape that is full of symbology and symbolism. And so I think the archetypes give us a way of perceiving these energies that exist in nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and earlier we were talking about, like, you know, building websites, and you have two websites, right? You have rogue farming and then living abundance, and you were sharing that it's hard to actually delegate some part of the processes to other people because they don't imprint that same coding or that same signature. And I've been on your website, right, the rogue natural farming one, and it was like there I noticed your coding, right? For example, I remember you chose the word steward or stewardship, right, which is not very common, but and you know, there was, you know, like, I was definitely spending time with your cause. So maybe, you know, you can share a little bit. And I think you also mentioned the coding when you were talking about creating your own labels, right? And your own imagery and choosing that and your process with that also. So maybe you can share a little bit about anything that I've mentioned here, whether it's like the labeling or the process of the websites. Or your own coding abilities.
Sure, yeah. I think that's a really important aspect of all of it, and I think it's part of what's taken me so long to kind of get it all together. It's literally been taking me years to distill down my website, living-abundance.com, and I've recently uploaded about half of my apothecary is on there, and I have a goal of within the next 2 months to have my full apothecary up there. And all of those, I have many spagyrics available. Some of my tinctures are not all spagyrics, but I'm moving towards being full spagyric, you know, apothecary. So that signature, yeah, you know, my other website is Rogue Natural Farming, and I did hire some help originally to kind of start setting up some websites. I've never done it before, and was kind of consulting out some of that work. And what I realized is I was, you know, telling people what I was looking for and kind of like this idea of what I wanted the website to look like, and kind of giving people ideas of like, okay, here's my product, and I would write kind of information about it and let them kind of elaborate and kind of use fancy language to make it sound good, and it just didn't seem as authentic, or like kind of like you said, that signature, that essence behind it. And so ultimately I like fired the help, and I'm like, you know what, I pretty much, I guess it's that old saying is if you want anything done right, you have to do it yourself, you know. And I think that's very true to staying pure to yourself, true to yourself with anything you do. Nobody's ever gonna, you know, do something the same way you're gonna do, and that's great. That's all our unique essences as well, to recognize that. But for me, yeah, the branding aspect of it. I come from an architectural drafting background, and really got into doing more illustration and graphic design. And so I do all of my own labels, everything on Living Abundance I've done myself, setting up the whole website, you know, myself essentially. And you know, all of the labels that I do, essentially everything, I'm not getting help from anywhere. So I do all the wild crafting. And so I guess that's, that's also why I really appreciate people who have a craft and they make it like they're entrepreneurs and they make it a side business in their life, or maybe they make it a full-time business in their life, which is what I'm pushing towards myself. And so there's a lot to be said for that, though. There's a signature, there's a purity, and just a very a lot of integrity within that, where I think these days it's kind of hard to find that integrity unless you're going to like the farmer's market or something and buying products that people make. You're not going to find products, or I don't even like to use the word products, but offerings in you're not going to find stuff like that in your common grocery store that has that amount of energy and somebody's essence imbued in it. And I think that's really important, and it's something I love, this idea of getting back to an agrarian society. So a society that's based more on trade, on art, on creativity and production, instead of outsourcing all of that. And kind of, I think as we outsource and we upsize, we're losing like integrity, and we're losing a sense of quality and nutrition and all that essence that is really important. It just kind of waters it down, when and for me, I guess a good example of that would be like doing a craft brew back in the day when I was, home brewing with my brother, versus, drinking a major, industrial beer. I mean, there's just not the love and energy in those, like the craft small batch stuff. So I think there's a big movement coming back to, people doing their own crafts, doing their own, whatever that is, whatever that looks like for you. It's cool to see that there seems to be a large movement back to that, when we had kind of the industrial revolution, and now like kind of outsourcing a lot of things and doing them on these just massive scales. I love to see it, people coming back into creating their passion, creating something that they love and put like so much love and energy into, and offering that to the local community. And I think it's really important to support these type of people in your community too, and that doesn't always have to be using the monetary system either. That can be, again, agrarian, where we're doing trade and bartering as well.
Mm-hmm. And don't you think, like, sometimes, I mean, you can be preparing something, a remedy or a tincture, like you were saying, and sometimes you don't even have to take it, but the whole process of preparing it, right? You're already connecting with that frequency, and it could be enough in itself. Like maybe the taking the few drops is adding a layer, but I think the process of connecting, or it's like for a website too, like first you have the idea, and then you put the work, and it's changing you internally. You have to change yourself internally to make it possible for it to be manifested, and that's a little bit of the same, right?
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. And as you were saying that, I thought about this like epiphany that I had at one point in time, and it used to be like, and kind of my approach, I think, has changed too. I think I was mentioning, well, earlier in our conversation, I was talking about these templates that I've created for a lot of my products. And I think within that framework or that template, right, if I used to kind of approach things like, okay, I gotta create the thing first, and then I need to kind of brand it and create everything else after that. But now it's almost like if you create that vessel first, then you can fill it in with what that essence is. Like I've almost kind of reversed the way that I create now, and creating these templates and frameworks. You can kind of almost like reverse engineer, in a sense, of that vision, and filling the cup after you've imagined it. And so, where at first it was really challenging to try to make all these labels. I was doing, this is Fire Mountain Cider, one of my original products. It's a fire cider. This has like cayenne pepper, poblano pepper, horseradish, garlic. This has wild crafted osha and rosemary. But anyways, with the labels, it was challenging at first, starting from scratch and like branding myself and creating these labels. I mean, people pay a lot of money for branding and marketing and label production, and so it took me many years to kind of get to a point where I feel good about the labels I'm producing, which has my creative essence to it. And now that I have these templates, though, I can pretty much come up with an idea really quickly of, let's say, like a formula that I want to do, like a sleep formula or a pain formula, or a bitters digestive tonic. I can kind of have this vision of like, I want to create something like that, and like the imagery around it, and I can jump on and work with my template, and in a very short time now I can have something that I can fill now with that recipe and have a marketable product. So I've gotten a lot better at the process of that creative process there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've noticed that also for me, like, like at first it was taking me like 1 month, 2 months to do something. And now
Yeah.
it can take me a few days, or sometimes, a few good hours of I think it goes with deprogramming, right? You also, because you don't have to go through all the corridors and taking in consideration maybe all these parameters. You're more centered within yourself, and you're just becoming faster at manifestation as well, because you kind of shedding all these layers that are really not necessary, but that you had to deal with in the beginning.
Yeah.
Because if you wanted to go anywhere, that you had to kind of find a path in your own maze corridor. And now I think it gets more, it's also we rise in frequency, and you become faster at manifesting what you see in your mind, right? So I've been definitely noticing some of that as well, and more confidence also in my own process, that there is less delegation to the exterior, right? So it's more straight to the point, more internal, and it flourishes a different way.
Absolutely. I mean, what you're describing there is an alchemical process in and of itself. It's like, to me, that is like distillation, and really refining the essence. And the more you do that, the better you become at it, and like the more efficient you are at that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you've been fine. I've seen you teaching in one of your video on your YouTube channel. You were teaching about Korean farming, right? And you were sharing with a lot of what you learn, and so I think this teaching kind of role is also important for you. And I would like to know maybe how did it started, and how does it manifest now in your day-to-day reality?
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, as I was discussing earlier in the intro, my interest into permaculture is where I really found Korean natural farming. I happened to be browsing some videos on permaculture on YouTube, and just kind of like learning, digesting as much as I could at the time. And I found some videos by a lady and her partner that were doing these different permaculture projects. And at the end of one of their videos, she walks up to what looked like a compost pile to me, and she starts talking about Korean natural farming, and starts speaking about what later I've learned to know as IMO3, which is indigenous microorganisms, and that's the third step. And so what that is it's a mesophilic style of composting, which means it's a more cold composting under 120 degrees. And instead of breaking organic matter down to a bioavailability that you can now use in your garden for your plants, what you're actually doing is instead you're culturing these beneficial microorganisms that you can add to the soil that are like the little alchemists of the soil. They're the ones that are excreting these enzymes, these exudates. They're exchanging exudates with the plants, and they're pairing and partnering with plants. And so, you know, that's the real power of Korean natural farming. It really starts with the indigenous microorganisms. There's more to it than that. There's other inputs and fertilizers, bioferments that we can make, but really the true power of the Korean natural farming is really utilizing these microorganisms that exist in nature. And there's a whole host of different products that, you know, these companies will try to sell you about these bio fertilizers, these bio amendments, and these probiotics for the soil. And, you know, I was just at an event here in Humboldt County the other day, and I was setting up to vend some of my Living Abundance products, and I had a conversation with this guy who he was just claiming that this new company that he was involved with, they had this product that was just superior than any other. It was the right blend of microbes. But for me, you know, any product that's created in a laboratory, like, so that here's the difference. So we talk about the difference between in vitro and in vivo. And the difference there is one's created in a laboratory in a sterile setting, and the other one is created in an environment where there's already naturally existing microbiology, which is really the basis of like who we are. We're composed of more microbiology than we are human cells, which is kind of a crazy fact to think about. Really, that's really the foundation is the IMO. And sorry, not to get too sidetracked, I get excited about talking about IMO, but further to your point, you know, I got introduced to it through this video, and then I started keyword searching Korean natural farming and came across a gentleman named Chris Trump, who's a teacher. He's kind of one of the original guys that brought it from Hawaii. So originally Korean natural farming, you know, it came across the Pacific. Like, really, Korean natural farming isn't the best name, KNF, because Master Cho, Hankyu Cho, his teachers, 3 of them were Japanese. And so really it kind of encompasses more Asian Oriental natural farming, because there's a tincture you use that's from traditional Chinese medicine as well. So just kind of a clarifier there for maybe some people that aren't as familiar with Korean natural farming. But I was able to go to one of the first workshop Chris Trump ever did in Boise, Idaho, and kind of get affiliated, like meet him in person and learn, and then, you know, meet this whole network of people that were really inspired in practicing these ways. And then I just became very passionate about it. I just started integrating it into my own practice, you know, as a farmer and gardener. And then I went to Hawaii, and I got to train with Master Hankyu Cho himself and his son, and get to know their family on a personal basis, which felt very blessed to do. But I also got a level 3 certification to teach under Cho's Global Natural Farming Hawaii, which was the chosen basically organization to spread Korean natural farming officially through Master Cho. So I felt very blessed to get that certificate to teach, and, you know, have been teaching for the past 5 years or so, doing different workshops. So that's kind of how it all came together, and it's really become an integral part of my life. It's not even a practice I do for farming. It's being the wildcrafter already by nature, like inherently. Now I wildcraft for my plants as well as myself, and, you know, and for other people too who want these medicines as well.
Mm-hmm. And was it like in the same like impulsion that you created your YouTube channel, right? Because you wanted to share, you have videos on there, right? And in some of these videos you show actually the process. For me it sounds also complicated. So if you have any tips on, how to make our garden stronger for a beginner with
Sure.
this process, you can also please be my guest.
Okay, great. Yeah. So yeah, the impetus for the YouTube channel, I think I've had that for a few years, and I have like 5 videos up there. And again, it's one of those things like where I'm getting better at editing that. I do all that myself too. Um, Really, I don't have a ton of time for video editing, just working as a manager on a full-time farm and everything else I have going on in my life, trying to do a side business and hopefully have a social life too. Um, so the videos, I just naturally I love sharing. So I just became a teacher, even though I never had, I actually am a very introverted person. I'm a Gemini and can be social, but I'm really a hermit. I'm a very introverted person, and some people that are surprised by that when I tell them that, because I kind of had to step into the spotlight, and part of that was like talking to Master Han Q Cho. Like, he asked me to carry on and teach this. Like, he personally asked me because he's now in his 90s. He's getting very old. He's not going to be around forever, and he asked me to carry this on, and I took that very seriously and promised him that I would. And it wasn't the most comfortable process for me to step into a role of teaching. I used to have a great fear of speaking publicly, and have gotten a lot better at that. But so I guess the videos are just kind of in addition to wanting to spread more information about Korean natural farming and these different protocols. And really, for me, I like to use the term regenerative farming now too, because then we can talk about permaculture, biodynamics, Jadam, Korean natural farming, and really these are all, there's a unifying kind of golden thread that ties all these together, and that's really the ethics behind it and the principles behind it and the spirit behind it. Sourcing resources locally, not using petroleum products, no-till, creating living soil, understanding the role that the microbiology plays and how crucial that is to healthy soil and our healthy microbiome. Really, the importance of those two things, like there's a direct connection there. The soil health and the health of the microbiome and the soil is also the health and the microbiome of people. That's where foraging and how humans used to forage and collect food, we were naturally getting these naturally existing like lactic acid bacteria and different biology that would help our microbiome. And now that we're completely kind of cut off, a lot of us, from local food, that's also hurting our microbiome. So for me, these different methodologies under the regenerative farming umbrella, it's also, I feel, a very important time to kind of resurrect these, because they're not new. These are all, you go back a few hundred years and everybody was doing natural farming. It doesn't matter where you're from or what lineage you come from. All of our ancestors were doing natural farming before the Industrial Revolution.
Like, what would you advise to me, like to make, like, as a beginner, to have my garden to be stronger, for example, either now or maybe next spring, or because I think I know I will, upgrade and build a stronger relationship with everything that's going on outside, right? I'm not there where you are, right? I also came to it a little later, and it takes time. It's a whole process inside, right? And every day, every year, maybe you explore a new thing and you're doing better than the year before, and it's a deepening as well, right? It becomes more and more natural, and you're also deprogramming from many layers, right? Where maybe, I mean, there was a lot of programming for us not to see what is just in front of our eyes, right? In nature, like berries and everything that is so out there for as resource, right? there has been much programming to cut us from any resource. Sometimes I don't know, like collecting rainwater and these kinds. Sometimes you have regulation that you cannot do that or things like that, right? So it's really to cut us from what's or like directly available to us. So what could I do, as a beginner to attempt and try and maybe even challenge myself a little bit, but that would still be in my reach, right?
Sure. Yeah, great question. And what I would really recommend is I've really come to appreciate the Jadam method. And so Jadam is Jadam. And so this is kind of a newer generation of natural farming stemming from Korea. And it's simplified a lot of the techniques into much more simple, user-friendly and really basic, very low cost and very basic things that you can use. And one really effective inoculant. So this is a way we can culture microorganisms, beneficial microorganisms to help build the soil. I'll just explain the technique really quickly. It's very simple. We can take potatoes or like a starchy crop. If you had cassava, potatoes would work. And potatoes are generally around the world. There's, it's pretty common. So if you take potatoes and you cook them to a point of which, you would eat them, let's say for mashed potatoes, you could boil them or bake them, however you want to do that. If you cook them to a point of being palatable and cook them, cool them down, and now you can put them in like a strainer bag or like even like a pillowcase, something like that. Take it out to a bucket of water. So generally you want to use 10 pounds of potatoes for every 50 gallons of water. It doesn't have to be exactly that, but that's kind of a good ratio to use. And so if you take these potatoes now and you take it outside and stick it in a bucket of water, now go out to the forest and collect some leaf mold. So we're talking about like the topsoil. Generally you want to look for like mycelium and fungi that's growing in the topsoil, and look for leaves that have a lot of this fungus on them. And so you would just take handfuls of that and bring it over to your bucket. You can put it in the same bag with your potatoes, or you could put it in another bag and hang it into your bucket. If you hang that from a rope and now into the bucket and you mash up all those potatoes, so all those starches are now released into the water, and then steep it just like you would steeping tea. So you're releasing, like you're pushing oxygen in there, and you're also releasing all these starches down in. The other thing is sea salt. So if you do 4 grams per gallon of sea salt, you're adding a trace mineral complex to that, which is a food source for these microorganisms. And as I said, you take that leaf mold, which is you're inoculating beneficial microbes into that culture. Now they can grow off of the source. Matter of can be done in 3 days. In your bucket of water, you'll see kind of a concentric ring around this bag of potatoes you put in there, and then you'll see a lot more bubbles across the surface. And you collect that when it has a really nice kind of fungal, foresty smell, which is generally about 48 hours to, if it's a lot colder, it might take longer, upwards of a week. In wintertime, I've had these take a week, but generally about 48 hours till this is done. And now you can go apply this to the soil, and it's a really amazing inoculant conditioner for the soil. That essentially what these microbes do is they can break up clay, they can break up rock, and so they're dissolving really hard organic compacted soils. They're going to be the ones tilling it for us. We don't have to go till and disturb the soil and kill some some of this life in the soil. We can let microbes do the tilling for us. And what they're doing is micronizing and releasing, breaking down all of these minerals for our plants for them to be bioavailable. So this is a process called flocculation too in the soil. And so that's one simple thing you can do. And there's a lot of videos like the Jadam. I would highly recommend Jadam YouTube channel. Yang Sancho has made it his life's mission to make this all open source information and give this information free to people. He's definitely an advocate for natural farmers, and he wants to see, you know, natural farmers taking the power back and not being, as you were mentioning in your last kind of interlude too, was yeah, you know, we can be kind of conditioned to think that we need to go buy all these products to farm, but really we don't. We have these resources. So like you could make a fruit juice out of fruit, that if you have excess fruit, if you have different herbs, plants around, you could make a plant juice from those, like those growth tips that are concentrated with those growth hormones. And the process of that, you can either do it a traditional Korean natural farming style by taking dry organic sugar and extracting it through osmotic pressure, just a process of using 1-to-1 plant matter to 1 part sugar, and literally that will draw the liquid out, and that has very powerful plant hormones in it that work at homeopathic doses when you use them on your plants. But Jadam is much more simple. Like we can, another very simple thing I'll just explain is called, so the last one with potatoes is called JMS, Jadam Microbial Solution. And I will be uploading videos on all these processes eventually too. I'm getting there. But the other one I'd like to mention, very simple for people to make, is called JLF. This is a Jadam liquid fertilizer. So again, we can take a bucket of water, and now you can go out and pick weeds in your garden and just throw them in this bucket of water. Or if you have mowed a lawn, you could use grass clippings, or you could use tree trimmings from a tree. So essentially, and you can really do this with anything. Jadam, I kind of joke because it is more complex than this, but I kind of joke that in Jadam, you can just like throw anything in a bucket of water and let it rot. And it's like, it's a fertilizer you can use. And there's some truth to that. You can do that with food scraps. You can do that with different manures. You can do that with, you know, plant matter, you know, weeds from your garden. I had a bunch of thistle in the garden beds this year. So, you know, thistle is a great dynamic accumulator, permaculture term, and that means it's high in many different minerals and elements. So what it does is it's a mineral miner. Those roots that thistle have reach down deep in the ground and pull up minerals and bring it up into the plant matter. So when you know, if you pull those weeds and now throw it in a bucket of water, when it putrefies and ferments down, it's now releasing all of these nutrients into the water. And so this is like a very basic way to make very potent fertilizers with some of, you know, and we're closing loops, which is basically just taking resources that we have around us, you know, and actually sometimes they're, you know, what might be considered a problem, like, you know, weeds. So we're taking a problem, we're now literally making a solution out of that, and a very effective fertilizer. And this is called JLF again, Jadam liquid fertilizer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very, you know, it's thank you. I will try as some of that. I need to check the vocabulary for some words, but I've been doing with, you know, nettle and comfrey, which is
those are great.
you know,
yeah.
like but and then the comfrey regrows. Comfrey is easier because you don't get the, you know, I mean, it's less messy than with the nettle. But
Yeah, you don't get spiked by the pricklies. Yeah, but yeah, those are both great options too. Those are also both dynamic accumulator plants, very high in different minerals. And comfrey is the classic chop and drop permaculture herb that, you know, I'm establishing a food forest here first season, but many food forests, you'll have comfrey as kind of the understory of different nurtured because you can just chop and drop it to essentially compost in place and create a mulch layer too. And comfrey will just spring back. Once you plant comfrey, it's not going away, and you can dig that up after a year and cut the roots, the rhizomes into just little pieces and go plant it around, and you'll have comfrey forever. And it's so great because like I say, you can just chop it and it'll grow back, and you can chop it again. And yeah, it makes a great fertilizer. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been, this, I think, every year, I have a little more vital energy, maybe it's been the same for you. I think it's a process with, uncording from all the energies we are corded, and, kind of realigning more this energy towards what we really want to focus on and what we really want to create. And every year I notice I have more energy. So this year I've done it a few times, right? 3 times, and every time the country was kind of getting back. Maybe last year I did it once. I don't really remember. I should keep like some notes also of all of that, because you think you remember and then you really don't always. So maybe you go back to your photos or so, right? I think you work also with mushrooms, so maybe you can talk a little bit about your connection with mushroom, and what do you do with them?
Yeah, I love to. Just real quick on what you said about the coding and all that. I think that's so important to be, more aware of our subconscious too, and the conditioning and coding that we're all exposed to. And I think that's a huge part of self-growth and shadow work too. And in Taoism, they say it's not what you learn, but what you unlearn. Like I really like that about Taoism. It's kind of an approach of unlearning. And so, but getting into mushrooms, yeah. So, I mean, this kind of ties in with the Korean natural farming, because really we're paying attention to the mycelial network and how that connects to everything. These trees, literally, forests are communicating, trees are communicating through these. They're the neural networks of the forest floor. There's like fungal mycelial networks. Literally, there are communications, like trees can exchange nutrients back and forth, and literally, exchange nutrients and speak to each other. And there's an intelligence happening there. And there's also an exchange happening from these fungi and bacteria in the soil, along with the symbiotic relationship, sometimes parasitic relationships too, but symbiotic relationships with different plants. And so there's an exchange of nutrients. Generally, like, mushrooms do not photosynthesize, and so they're teaming up with the plants because trees and plants can photosynthesize and turn carbon into carbohydrates, and sunlight into carbohydrates, and these exudates, these sugars, are now excreted in the soil. And so that's food for these fungi and different biology that are now breaking down other things in the soil and exchanging them for the exudates that they're getting, and feeding the trees and the plants as well. And so there's this elaborate harmony that's taking place, this symbiotic symphony, you might say. And really, like, there's a lot being learned about it, but we're just scratching the surface, literally, on how all of these different microbes like interact in nature, and kind of their roles in working together with different plants and building soil and all that. And so the mushrooms really are just the fruiting bodies of these different mycelial networks. And they are amazing healers, and can create amazing medicine and nutrition. So I use spagyric processing for mushrooms as well. One of the, let me see if I had some right here. I don't see it. One of the mushrooms I really work with is red-banded polypore. And this is a mushroom that has been studied, clinical studies. It's known for efficacy on fighting cancer cells. It has been tested in a lab and shown to eradicate cancer cells up to like 50%. And so these are very adaptogenic. These are very immunostimulating to our system. I mean, they work on all of these different levels. You know, they are truly amazing, and have, you know, along with the herbs, they're as important, you know, on the shelf with the apothecary as the herbs as well. And so I'm working with different mushrooms. I'm actually starting to culture my own, but I do wildcraft, you know, sustainably wildcraft mushrooms. And the red banded polypore is extremely common too. That's not a mushroom that, you know, you're ever going to over harvest. So it's an extremely potent medicine and, you know, adaptogen, which is kind of regulating the body's energy and bringing balance and equilibrium to your body. And so yeah, more and more I love the mushrooms. They're, you know, there's a lot more I think you have to learn when you're wildcrafting mushrooms and getting to know lookalikes and what you're looking for. But definitely it's an area that I'm expanding into and learning more about. And in the future, I hope to have a lot more in culturing my own too. I hope to have a lot more spagyric offerings of mushrooms, and you'll find those on Living Dash Abundance. Right now, I do have one available, which is the red banded polypore spagyric.
Mm-hmm. And I think it works on the lymph, right? Would that be why it's also so efficient, right? Because it's I don't know if it's moved the lymph, or probably it kind of does what exercise also can do for us, but the mushroom can also do a lot for us. And to come back to something you were saying also about Jen, is that I like Jen, you know, when you introduced me to it, because it was not sugar based, right? It was not working with that sugar. So I think it's a very different signature as well. And I do agree with you with the cold lab signature, right? And you know, I grew in discernment maybe, and maybe just awareness about, you know, sometimes maybe you buy these products from cold labs and they don't do much, right? Or it's like you might be doing just as good to connect yourself with the plant or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, definitely have to be careful where you're sourcing from. And again, I always recommend finding an herbalist, a naturopath in your community and supporting them. You know, somebody who's reputable and has put in the time, and, you know, supporting your local farmers market. Those wild crafted herbal medicines are always going to be stronger than cultivated. That's just a fact, because you get the essence of nature. And what's really interesting, if you think about like ecology, and, you know, something I learned from one of my teachers, Sage Apotham, he talks about this a lot. But like, you have, if you get into this kind of thinking around, it has some different names, but humoral medicine is one of the names. And this is a way of looking at energetics of plants, hot, cold, wet, dry, and the ecology of our body, like different diseases. Like if you maybe, you know, different conditions that exist. And so it's interesting, because you can look at plants that grow in similar environments to what you're treating on the human body. Let's just say, like, you have like a lot of phlegm and a lot of mucus buildup, and you could use a herb that grows in a similar environment, that grows in a very wet environment, and it's treating the same ecology like in the human body. So there's energetic architecture there, and using that like on the human body. It's a really interesting way of practicing herbalism and looking kind of deeper at the energetics of herbs, and not using them in this allopathic way of take this for that and kind of just this very, you know, let's take care of uh, the problem, but not really fix the solution. This more energetic, humoral, just the symptom.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so in that regard, what's interesting is, I'll just use the example of yarrow. So I found this really amazing bluff here in Humboldt County, right on the ocean, where I harvest yarrow, and it's some of the most potent, strong, like flavored, amazing yarrow that I've ever experienced. But then I'll go harvest some, when I moved to Oregon, I was more like on the east side of the Cascades, which is much more like high desert, drier. And up in those mountains around there, I would go harvest yarrow, but it was completely different. I mean, we're talking about the same species, but had a completely different energetics to it based on the ecology it was growing. And so there's something to be said for that too. And if we're culturing, plants, they're never gonna, like the yarrow I culture will never be as potent as that yarrow you can find in nature as well. So this is why I really love wild crafting. Of course, we have to do it responsibly, ethically. We don't want to endanger, certain plants that are at risk or at danger of being over harvested. We have to have ethics in doing all of this, but no doubt, potent medicines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when I shared time with you, you were also fascinated and passionate about some of the fringe topic in your research and esoteric matter and ufology and I think self work also and shadow work. So since then you probably have journey even more. So could you share a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I've always kind of like been into these occult, I don't know, I've been very drawn. I'm a Scorpio rising and Gemini sun, Aquarius moon. But I think that Scorpio in me comes out, and like Scorpio's very interested, it's like deep water, still water, and it's kind of interested in the depths of life. And so maybe that's kind of like energetically where that interest comes in for me. But I've always kind of been interested on like those ulterior dimensions, and like you said, ufology kind of falls into that, and these esoteric sciences, for me, a lot of that, alchemy has led me into like hermeticism, and which is basically just philosophy that comes from Egypt. And a lot of these different ideas and philosophies that have been kind of repressed or hidden. And if you go back and study, history, you kind of see how this happened intentionally. And I'm not here to bash any religion or any practice or anything, but definitely throughout history, there were powers that be that really stomped out a lot of these esoteric and ancient practices. And so I don't know, I've always just naturally been really interested in kind of these esoteric topics and been drawn to them, kind of the mysteries of life. These for me, like what the Buddhists would call like the Maya, right? The illusion that we're in, like this 3D we were talking about. It's always felt really kind of superficial to me. Like I've always known there's a lot more going on, and so what is beneath the surface more has always been interesting to me. I did when I was a kid. I remember having out of body experiences from a young kid. Like I remember getting these fevers, and I'd be laid up in bed and vividly remember being like floating outside of my body and like seeing myself on the bed and being able float around the house. And so and I've also kind of like, it's sometimes I like look at my hands and like it's such a trip that I'm encased in this like meat suit, and like, I feel like almost confined in the suit. Like it almost doesn't feel real. Like, the essence of who we are is something I think much greater than this physical, experience we're having. Not to downplay this physical experience. I think there's great having this experience, in a physical form is an amazing experience to have. And I think, we take what we experience here onto our next life. I definitely believe like we're being spiritual beings having a human experience, and that we never, we definitely don't die in my eye after, this version of ourselves passes on. I mean, again, it's the life, birth, and rebirth. This is the cycle of life, and death is only a rebirth.
Earlier, you were mentioning, the repression that, you can encounter when you are with some of the creators, having founded their natural method. So I was wondering, is it something you encountered in your own life? Have you noticed any interferences going on, or any attempt to kind of discourage you maybe to take certain role or to take certain roads, or to manifest what you have as a vision, whatever it is, however it
Yeah.
kind of like it can be, it can be also the impact it has on your psyche, right?
Sure.
There are some energies that are discouraging you, that are not encouraging you. There are some parasitic energies. If you are in a room, in a workshop, you often have like this kind of this troublemaker element that kind of try to spoil the frequency, the distraction energy, or these kind of things. Can be any form. It can be, as you were saying, like meat suit form, or more invisible. I think there is a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important part of, definitely when you get into medicine making and the space that you're creating in, and especially when it comes to alchemy and using these subtle energetics, being very conscious of your environment, what you're bringing into your environment, who is stepping into your environment, and what kind of baggage they're bringing into the environment, what kind of entities might be attached, or you know absolutely, that is a big part of creating a very clean energetic space is paramount to creating to medicine, and creating alchemical elixirs and what have you. So yeah, I think it's very important. Into ora at labora it means pray at work, and it essentially means when you're stepping into the laboratory, or like for me this could even be like if you work at a desk job, or it doesn't matter where you work, but kind of like whatever you do and work. And this could go for food, like when you're making food, if you're making food and you're like upset or angry, I mean, you're putting that energy into the food. And this is so ora at labora, pray at work. Really what it means is make sure, like if you're stepping into like that place that you're working, and into the alchemist, the laboratory is a sanctuary. So when you're stepping in there, you need to be clean and clear, and you don't want to step in there being angry, upset, having these grappling with things on your conscious or subconscious. So if you do find yourself in that kind of thinking or modality, it's important to just step away and go meditate, or go for a walk in nature, or whatever you need to do to clear that out. But I think that's an important practice, not just stepping into a laboratory making medicine, but I think, like I said, cooking, or just how we approach life with the work we do, like mindset is so important, and being clear and being aware of maybe subconscious things too, which are harder to see within ourselves because they're behind our immediate consciousness. They're kind of lingering behind, and becoming conscious of those subconscious things, which, as I said, is always as easy of noticing, but no doubt it's still as important to know what we're bringing into that field of creation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when I receive a message from you, I always feel like you really write in a sentient way, right? And sometimes when I finish reading your message, I shared with you that I felt like, for a moment I was outside of space and time. So I know you have abilities, you have psychic abilities and probably many other types of abilities. So I was wondering, what is your relationship with them, and when did you start to notice them? With maybe they were repressed when you were younger. You shared about out of body experiences, right? So how has it been for you? Because I know you're also a coder, because I've seen in the codes you embed in your website, and I imagine you embed it also in everything you create.
Wow, thank you for seeing me, and I see you too, and I noticed that, yes, you are very intuitive as well, and that's a really interesting question. And like, for one thing, coming back to like my sun sign, Geminis are, they can't keep lies, I'll say that. Like, they like to talk about things and share things, and like, if anything I've got myself in trouble for I'm a very truthful person. And maybe, I saw this African proverb lately that said, like, those who speak the truth have no friends. And there's a lot of truth to that. Like, like, you know um and so, I don't know, I'm a very honest person. I speak my mind. And I can't tell you, like, I think I have developed my more intuitive psychic abilities. I think it's always been with me to a certain degree. I think we all have them to a certain degree. I'm trying to even think where, other than maybe it just being inherently having some of those abilities. I don't know. I can look at somebody and know if they're telling me the truth. And I think part of that is just doing the work on myself. And I think part of that comes with, doing shadow work on yourself, and being honest with yourself, and working on the subconscious. And I think once you do that, then you can, like, see it in other people too. And you just become, uh, you develop those skills more, and you're able to see them, kind of these naturally existing energies. But I think also, people will people will tell you what they really think. And if you know how to look for subtle clues, like, you can really read people pretty easily. Like, it's, maybe there's subtle lies that are harder to pick up on, but the truth kind of speaks for itself. And let's say somebody is a compulsive liar, like, they might be able to hide things from you for a while, but that's not going to last for long. Because usually compulsive liars too, they lie so much they start to believe themselves. So it's almost like, to them, they're not lying, and that's why they could be so believable. But that's only going to work for so long, until, like, these lies start to kind of unravel, and, like, their story isn't, like, making sense. And, like, so you can kind of see what somebody's saying versus what they're doing. And for me, that's always really important, is to look at somebody's actions and not just what they say. I think there's a lot of people who talk a game, all kinds of game, and all kinds of, like, talk philosophy. You can go talk to any person on the street, and they might have some great philosophy that they think is the secret to life. But what is it actually doing for them? How are they incorporating that into their life? So for me, talk is cheap. Like, talk is important, speech is important, spelling, we're literally creating with our speech, creating through our actions. And that's how powerful speech is. Where, spelling is literally casting spells. Beyond that, I don't know where that intuitive faculty or psychic ability comes from, but maybe I don't even, sometimes I'm just like, isn't everybody like that? I just don't acknowledge it.
I mean, you have like the synthetic versions, and then you have the real versions who are connected to source, and they are surprising, they are creative, and they can tap to the infinite. So yes, you have many ways of being psychic here, but your way is also very genuine, and I think that's also there is specificity. And I think you were mentioning it's also about recognizing the signature inside of ourselves, right? And then we can trace it also in others. And sometimes we also it's a two-way kind of communication, and it's all about tracing signatures and putting signatures in what we do, branding. That's why I don't also believe so much, and I think you kind of touch on that in marketing techniques, because there is a lot of mind control actually to make you believe that you need a certain type of branding, or and it's sure that there is a lot of repression, but the more you work on your signature and to bring it to materialization, which I think you do a lot, and I do the same, right? The more you bring also your own power. So I really like that, and recognizing the other reels in the game, and I think building and co-creating together has a lot of power, and exchanging, because you definitely have many skills that I don't have, or I don't work on developing. Maybe I've been an alchemist also, but and I am in a way, but I do it in another way, and in some ways we have also similar abilities, right? Because we the branding, or the building a website, and all the skills and the process that it requires, and speaking your message and all of that. I think I would like to end with maybe a question about how do you deal with the losses in this game. I know you've gone through different sort of losses and grief processes, and so have I. So I was wondering if you'd like to share any words of wisdom about that. I know you have done a lot of alchemy also for these kind of processes.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's a great subject to end on, and definitely, yeah, I think I've gone through some personal transformation this year, and can definitely speak to that. I think from a lot of people I've talked to, there seems to be something in the collective. I know we're going through all these retrogrades, and we went through Lionsgate, and there's a lot of planetary energy happening, but I think a lot of people are having their own struggles and going through these personal transformations. And I think that for me, what I can say is, if you go through something really traumatic, and I have been through some really hard experiences within the last, like, this year, let's just say, you kind of like reach a point where it kind of like that dark night of the soul for whoever's kind of gone through that. It's just this place of like coming to a point of hitting a wall, or having a tragedy or a loss in your life. And there's kind of two ways you can go. You can either kind of cave in and implode with that energy and let it kind of draw you down into the darkness, which is a really sad affair if that happens, because some people can't get over certain traumas or things that happen to them in life, and they do get pulled into that. But what I found, and this is definitely not easy work by any means, is that you can, alchemy is essentially this, like the dark night of the soul, it would be considered like putrefaction or fermentation. So we go down into the depths and we ferment, and we release that spirit, and then when we, after fermentation, we distill that spirit out of this putrefaction, this muck, and that essence, again, the phoenix rising kind of symbolizes this. We can take these hard experiences and we can use them as a means of growth. And so rather than kind of going down the rabbit hole, we can say like, okay, well, what were the lessons learned here? How can I just move on with my life and find meaning from this? And how can I grow and better myself? And so for me, like, it comes down to more like self-preservation and loving yourself more too, like kind of filling your cup, so that, like, if we want to go out and be in a relationship, be that romantically, in a business partnership, or however that may be, we really have worked enough on ourselves and have a full cup to offer, rather than showing up with an empty cup, that we have nothing really to offer a situation because we haven't done that work. So I think for me, what's happened to me this year is I use the rough experiences that I've been through to help me, like, love myself more and spend more time with myself, exercising more, doing more yoga and meditation, and really going more into my practices of like my side business. And so however, like, you can do that in your own unique way, whatever your passion is or your desire, or if you like working out, or kind of setting goals for yourself to kind of use this experience to actually level you up instead of bring you down, because these traumatic experiences or hardships or adversities that we go through can do one or the other for you. And I'm here to say that I've been in some dark places, but you always rise out of them, and you can kind of hone in that aspect of yourself to realize that it's these adversities that make you stronger. And even in certain like esoteric and occult mystery schools, they talk about, like, you have to go through these hardships as an initiation to get to the next level. And so in some ways, I think that as hard as these things can be, this is kind of why we're here. We're not here to suffer, but we're here to experience things and grow from them in our life. And I think the lessons never stop, and we never stop growing if we allow ourselves to. And the only time we become stuck is if we become attached to a certain outcome, if we become attached to a vision we had, or an illusion we had that wasn't actually what we thought it was, and just staying detached and knowing that the only thing that's certain in life is that there will be change, and nothing is ever how you originally perceive it. Things are always evolving, changing throughout life. So if you can kind of learn to accept that and just stop trying to control everything, but understanding the things you can control and the things that you can't, but just kind of learning to be okay with that, and rolling with whatever life brings you, because there will be curveballs for sure. I think that can really help in these transformative experiences in our lives.
Well, thank you. This was a beautiful last note. And I would like you to remind us where we can find you, right? Your two websites, and you're also on YouTube, and you have an Instagram account, and I've been following your journey. You post really interesting alchemical processes. And I've been, I really appreciate following your journey and your creation. So if you could repeat them for us again, and it's an ongoing conversation between us. So I would love to keep this, tune again in the future. I know you will be launching officially your website soon and adding all you have as a vision, and probably you have much more in store. But things need to be done in a certain order. I know that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure, Arya. I love speaking with you, and I just see you as such a radiant truth seeker. And I love reading. Your writing is very inspiring. And I just think you're doing some really amazing work, and really finding really amazing people out there too, and really bringing their stories to a larger audience. So I commend you for all that you're doing as well, and had a lot of fun talking to you today. Yeah, so my two websites are Living Abundance, living-abundance.com. And that website is live. I have probably about half of my apothecary up on there. Herbal tinctures. I have Benevolent is a hive cider, a probiotic hive cider. I have a Propolis spagyric, another product from the beehive. This will also be available soon on living-abundance.com, as well as a lot of different tinctures that I have going. And then roguenaturalfarming.com is more the agriculture and Korean natural farming, permaculture, regenerative farming. So you can find me there, Rogue Natural Farming on YouTube, for more consulting and education around regenerative farming.
Thank you so much, Preston. It's been such a joy to speak with you. Stay with me online, and I'm really looking forward to go on your website, actually, Living Abundance, because I haven't been checking it out. And I would like to have order some of your products, and work with them. So thank you so much for co-creating in this space with me. I've been really...
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Arya. It's a pleasure. Thank you.